Hey, book lovers. My name is Em, and I want to talk about books. And cats. Hey, book lovers. So, I got myself an early Christmas present this year, which, if you follow the Books and Cats podcast Instagram, you might have already seen. If not, books.cats.pod. There's lots of pictures of cute cats. So, normally this time of year, I get 2 books from the book of the month because I am a BFF member, so I can pick from one of the finalists for their book of the year and get that book as well. Now, some months I'm not super interested in any of the options that they have, which is fine because they do have other things that you can pick from if you don't want any of that month's books. This time, though, there were so many that interested me that I could not choose. So I thought, well, it's Christmas, so I got 4 books total. It was by far the biggest blue box that I have gotten since joining Book of the Month, and it made me so happy. So much dopamine. I love getting packages, and books bring me a level of comfort and joy that is like nothing else. So I guess I got myself some tidings of comfort and joy. Anyway, one of those books was A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw. And, this one was a good one. I'm going to do my best to discuss this without spoilers. Read this book. It is fantastic. So, the general premise is that a children's book author named Maggie St. James disappears. She goes off into the forest and just goes missing. After 5 years, her parents have exhausted most of the traditional methods, and they hire Travis Wren to try and find their daughter. Travis has a unique talent that makes him very good at finding people. If he touches an object that they owned, he can see snapshots of the owner's story, where they went, what they did. He almost always finds the people. They're not usually still alive, unfortunately, but sometimes they are. Now, he also carries the burden of his own sister's death and his near miss at almost finding her in time to save her. His search for Maggie St. James becomes entangled with his own trauma, and he decides that finding Maggie can be some sort of redemption. He finds her car near an old forest trail and follows her into the dark woods. Then the book jumps to a new section and a new location and group of people. Now we are in Pastoral, a group of people living off of the land deep in the forest and at one with nature. Now, while most of the life in the community seems idyllic, there is a threat lying at the borders. The trees have a pox. The trunks split open and ooze a black goo. Anyone who crosses the border develops the pox and dies. Anyone exposed to rain also develops the pox. The community lives in constant fear, and they have become completely cut off from the rest of the world. If the world beyond even still exists. They have no way of knowing how far the pox has spread. In Pastoral, Calla and Theo are married, and Calla's sister Bee lives with them. She is blind. Her vision faded away at 19 and never returned, but it has given her an incredible sense of hearing. It's almost like a superpower. It is such a cool perspective that is not often seen in books, and I found it really intriguing. She was my favorite character by far. Theo is antsy. He's feeling trapped and like he needs to escape Pastoral. He's the night guard at the gate on the road leading out of Pastoral, which no one has passed through in a decade because of the pox. But he still sits and watches nightly, thinking about what lies beyond. Now, Calla is kind of a melancholy woman, a strict observer of the community rules, and she now feels her husband is slipping away from her. And she's not sure what to do about that. And she's got secrets of her own. There is one other major character in Pastoral that we need to talk about. Levi. He runs Pastoral. The original man who brought the community into existence was named Cooper. He raised Levi like a son and prepared him to take over when he passed. Now Levi runs things as best as he can, though he does have some nagging doubts about the people's continued trust in him. Levi and Bee have a very special relationship. They have been close since they were young, and he stayed beside her when she lost her sight. She helps him by gathering information that would be unheard by others, and he uses it to guide his decisions. All of this sounds great, right? Well, not everything is as it seems, in so many ways, but I'm going to leave it there for now. Give this book a read. There are some almost magical moments, and the climactic scene and the ending are so good. This book is an A++. Check out A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw, and let me know what you think. I'd love to discuss this one further. So now it's time for a break, and when I come back, I'm talking about Christmas. Welcome back, book lovers. So, quick update on Smokey Christmas. He's still around. We hadn't seen him in a couple days, and we thought he had moved on, and then we saw him running around our backyard. He's still eating food that we put out. It's been warmer lately, so he seems to be doing really well. If nothing else, hopefully we can help fatten him up a little before we get into these sub-zero temperatures that we know are coming in January. Anyway, speaking of Christmas, as I mentioned last December, I am obsessed with A Christmas Carol. I'm a big fan of Dickens, and the idea of a Christmas ghost story is just perfection to me. I have read this book almost to the point of having it memorized, and I staged it yearly for 7 or 8 years. I love it. My favorite, and honestly the one that follows the actual text of the book the closest, somehow, is A Muppet Christmas Carol. Now, I loved this first 29 years ago because I love the Muppets. I was a kid. I saw this in the movie theaters. Wild. I'm so old. Anyway, I loved it first for the Muppets, and then I read the book in high school, and I became obsessed with the story itself. I'm a big nerd. I know. Proud of it. So the other day, I thought my whole family had gone to bed early, and I was looking for something to watch. I wanted a little Christmas spirit, and The Muppet Christmas Carol is always my go-to. It's probably always the first Christmas movie I watch every year. Anyway, I had just started it when my oldest showed up and watched it with me, so that was nice. We were discussing the many different versions of A Christmas Carol that we have watched and which ones are our favorites. We watched a super spooky one last year, and we were discussing how it would fit with our spooky Christmas theme this year. So I think that one's on the to-watch list. Anyway, I was trying to find that one, and I stumbled onto an article listing movie versions of A Christmas Carol. The thing I found super interesting was that the very first one was in 1901, and it was a silent film, which I found really interesting considering this was a movie based on a book. At the time, Dickens had only been deceased for 30 years, which is kind of crazy. There was another version in 1910 that was completely soundless, and it only lasted 13 minutes. Wild. So my Christmas obsession is in full swing right now. We just had our own unique celebration that we do every year, usually a week or two before Christmas. We call it Hygge. So a few years ago, I read about the idea of Hygge. It's a Danish and Norwegian word for the mood of coziness and comfort with the feelings of wellness and contentment. I took this idea and I mixed it with the Icelandic practice of reading and eating chocolate on Christmas Eve, which is called Jólabókaflóð, I believe. I'm not sure. Jólabókaflóð, that can't be right. I'm so sorry. Anyway, it started during World War II when paper was one of the few things that was not being rationed in Iceland. And because of this, Icelanders gave books as gifts while other commodities were in short supply. And it turned them into a country of book lovers. Like us. Check out the article about Jolaboca flood in the show description. It's really interesting. Anyway, so I learned about both of these things very close together, and I decided this was something that I wanted in my life. Now, I am the only book addict in my family. Everyone reads, but not nearly as much as me. And while the idea of reading all night was appealing, I wanted to do something that was a little more geared toward our family. I settled on my own melding of these ideas, and now our family celebrates our own hygge. It's a day dedicated to relaxation and comfort and family time. We do small gifts and games with little prizes. There's usually artistic activities. This year we did, I bought a bunch of different colored clay, and we just watched Christmas movies and made things out of clay, and it was really relaxing and fun, and we just had a lot of great, conversations. It was absolutely fantastic. Hygge is one of my favorite things now. We've done it for the last 3 years, and everybody really looks forward to it and loves it. Probably almost as much as actual Christmas, which is pretty wild, but it's a lot of fun. Anyway, so on to the quote of the week. I have a couple for you, as usual. And I wanted to make them kind of like Christmas or like holiday season related. I'm sorry I talk about Christmas so much. It's just because that's what we celebrate, and we celebrate kind of a pagan, weird version of it anyway. I don't mean to exclude anyone. So anyway, I looked for quotes from holiday movies. The first one comes from Jingle All the Way, and it is, "I'm of the mindset that you can never do too much to make a child's Christmas magical." And this is 100% me. I'm a bit of a Christmas crazy. My family likes to joke about it. I just love it. I think that in some ways I'm probably making up for lost time, but I don't know. I just like to make Christmas magical. I feel like as soon as I had my kids, I knew that these Christmases were limited and that I wanted to make each and every one as special as possible. And it's just fun, you know? I really like doing it. I like making Christmas. Anyway, the second quote is from Frosty the Snowman. "I suppose it all started with the snow. You see, it was a very special kind of snow. A snow that made the happy happier and the giddy even giddier." And this I mostly chose because all of our snow has melted. It was like 60 degrees the other day, which is really weird. And I want the snow back. I want a white Christmas. And I know exactly that kind of snow, those big fluffy flakes. It really does just make you happier to look at it. Or at least it makes me happier. I am definitely not one of those people that hates winter. So now, shifting gears completely, it is time for a new chapter of my weekly writing project, Heart of the Storm, which comes straight from my brain to you with no editing. So forgive plot points that don't make sense. I'll get them eventually. Anyway, please enjoy chapter 36 of Heart of the Storm. Lizault watched Harper disappear into the store on the hill. He didn't remember ever seeing the ramp there before, but he found he couldn't really remember the front of the store at all. He watched from the safe house across the street and waited for Harper to come out. Hours passed. The pretty young woman with purple hair emerged and locked up for the night. She hurried through the fog and walked directly for Lizault's building. His heart pounded with unfounded fear. There were so many reasons for her to be in this building. She didn't know he was here. She didn't know what he'd seen. Rapid footsteps thundered up the stairs. Lizault held his breath as the footsteps paused on his floor. He heard a beep, but the footsteps moved on quickly. He heard a door open on the floor above and more footsteps, directly above him. He exhaled slowly and tried to calm his racing heart. He needed to be as quiet as possible. He crossed the room and slipped out of the apartment. He used his wings to glide from landing to landing, and he was almost out the front door when he heard the footsteps on the stairs. Lizault shot into the hazy sky and darted away. Then the sky erupted into flames as his building exploded. He flew higher to avoid the heat. From his viewpoint, he could see a dark speck running away from the building. It disappeared into the store a moment later, and Lazalt dove with all his might. He sliced through the air and put all of his energy forward. Allie was struggling to close the door. Lazalt shot through like a gust of wind and pulled the door from her grip. She cursed, grabbed the door, and then finally wrestled it shut with a bang. Lazalt clung to the ceiling and focused on blending in, becoming invisible. He didn't have to worry. Allie was consumed with combing out a tangle in her hair, and she walked to the back of the store and disappeared behind the curtain without looking up. The lights went out when she left the room. Lazalt waited a few more moments, then silently dropped to the floor. He moved carefully through the racks. He wasn't sure what to do next. He had served his purpose. Nim had been delivered. Keva was neutralized. He just happened to spot Harper, and he had chosen to follow her out of curiosity. Now he was locked in and frozen with indecision. The lights snapped on, and Lazalt didn't respond. He truly couldn't move. Allie stood in the doorway with her eyes, and a gun, trained on him. "Please," he gasped. "Don't shoot." He was sweating with fear, but his body was like stone. Allie laughed. Her eyes sparkled, and she lowered the gun. "I don't harm, I heal. Lucky for you." She put the gun somewhere behind the curtain and moved into the storeroom with Lazalt. She snapped her fingers, and he collapsed with a grunt onto the floor. She laughed again. "Hello, Lazalt," she said as she reached down to help him up. He accepted her hand and hopped to his feet. "Thanks. Have we met?" "No, but you've been spying on me." "So you blew up an apartment building?" Allie rolled her eyes. "I was just doing my assignments. Maz told me if any spies showed up, specifically a man with wings, then I needed to blow up the building. No one else lived there, just ghosts." Lazalt slumped against the counter and a glass dish rattled. "Maz told me to kill you. The purple girl." He held out a silver knife with a purple stain on the blade. Allie's face went pale and greenish. "What now?" she asked after a moment. Lazalt let the knife slip from his fingers and clatter to the floor. Allie didn't move. She didn't even look to see where the knife fell. She kept her eyes on Lazalt. "I don't want to hurt you," he said finally. "I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to make my own choices." Allie agreed. She was tired of the ancient ideas of their elders. She was a simple witch. She had a talent for healing, and she was strong enough to handle it. Her foster mom and the aunts made her work so much more difficult. "Same," she said with a smile. Then her face grew more thoughtful. "I feel like I can trust you. Do you agree?" He nodded. "Okay," she said. She had made her decision. "Come with me. I have something to show you." She held the curtain aside and motioned for Lazalt to pass through. "What's that?" Nim whispered so quietly that she wasn't sure at first she'd spoken. Still, Rhea heard her. Of course she did. "Not sure," she whispered back. They kept moving toward the hulking dark shapes in the shadowy room. Rhea was focused on the glittery silver mass sitting in a sliver of moonlight by the window. Nim, however, had spotted a much larger shape hidden in the shadows. She kept her eye on that one. She couldn't be certain, but she thought she saw it breathing. Rhea didn't care about Nim's worries. She had reached the mass of sparkling stone and gasped when she saw the face there. "Nim, look," she exclaimed. "She looks like us." Nim dragged her eyes away from the darkness and examined the face. It was captured in a moment of confusion and fear, and she seemed to be looking at something just over Nim's shoulder. "I guess so," she said uncertainly. Her eyes snapped back to the shadows, but the hulking shape was gone. She whipped her head from side to side, scanning the darkness frantically for any sign of the massive form. "What are you doing?" Rhea asked irritably. "Stop it." "Where is it?" Nim yelled. "Where did it go?" "What?" Rhea started to ask, but she stopped. Her eyes grew wide. "Nim," she whispered. "Don't turn around." Something smacked their shoulder and sent them spinning across the room. The monster from the shadows revealed himself in the moonlight. There had once been a handsome human face there, but he had been cursed. It twisted him into a grotesque monstrosity that scared Nim while also tugging on her heartstrings. "Oh, stop," Rhea growled. "It doesn't do any good to feel bad for it. Come on." They were sprinting away from the monster, toward an open door. Soft light illuminated their goal. Nim could hear the thundering steps of their pursuer. There was nothing she could do. Rhea was in full control. They made it to the doorway and slid into the hall beyond. Rhea spun around and slammed the door shut. Immediately, a heavy silence enveloped them. The footsteps and heavy breathing of the monstrosity were gone. If he reached the door, he did not bang on it or try the knob. Only Rhea's labored breathing broke the silence. Nim looked down the hall. The walls were faded red and white vertical stripes, and it hurt her head to look at it for too long. White doors lined both sides of the hall, but only one of them stood open. Another rectangle of soft light lit the worn brown carpet at the end of the hall. "Look," Nim said softly. Rhea grimaced as she continued to struggle for breath. "I guess that's where we're going next," she gasped. "Are you okay?" Nim was startled to see the gray tone in Rhea's normally rusty gold skin. A faint sheen of sweat covered her forehead. "Something is wrong," she said through gritted teeth. "Can't you feel it?" And suddenly she could. The shoulder on Rhea's side was heavy and cold. "It's spreading," she said. Her teeth were chattering uncontrollably. "Better keep moving," Nim said. Her voice was surprisingly calm. It certainly didn't match her insides. She was grateful for that, at least. She could pretend everything was fine and go on autopilot. Rhea let her take over, and she hauled them up off the floor. Nim leaned hard on the wall as they staggered down the hallway toward the rectangle of light. She tried to ignore the icy weight she was fighting against. By the time they reached the open doorway, Rhea's entire side was cold and stiff. The entire arm was now useless, and the foot dragged. They crashed into the open doorway and peered into the warmly lit room. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and the polished stone floor glittered with its light. A thick, soft white carpet covered the floor, and the edges were lined with large, overstuffed pillows in vibrant reds and golds. Amidst the lavish comfort sat an ornate, oversized throne. Perched amidst the cushions and gold filigree, Thea sat facing the door, watching them expectantly. She had been waiting for them. "Hello, girls," Thea said smoothly. "Almost didn't make it, I see. Sit. I can fix it." She gestured, and a couch moved into place beside her chair. Nim dragged their partially frozen body over and flopped down. Thea was not a large woman, but she was terrifying all the same. Nim knew she should be on guard and not let the woman near them, but she didn't have the strength. Rhea stirred beside her. She wanted to take over, and Nim gladly let her. Thea was speaking, but she couldn't make out the words. She was exhausted, and Rhea drained what little energy was left. Nim closed her eyes. She was exhausted, and Rhea drained what little energy was left. Nim closed her eyes and drifted away. "There you are." Nim heard a familiar voice, and her heart leapt. She opened her eyes and was back in the river. Cerise was floating nearby. "I'm not really here, am I?" Nim asked. She tried to look at her own hand, but she only saw swirling water. "No," Cerise said evenly. "I'm sorry. You're bonded to the earth now. Maz said this would happen." "You spoke with Maz?" Nim felt unnecessarily angry at the thought. It didn't help when Cerise laughed at her question. "Of course," she said with a smile. "Do you still think you were the only one? We were all pawns, Nim. You're just playing a part." "Maz is gone," Nim replied coldly. Cerise looked startled for a moment, but then a wide, real smile crossed her face. "Interesting. You're sure?" Nim remembered Rhea collapsed on the floor of the stone cavern, the multiple deaths that followed. She was playing her part all right. Cerise had no idea how much. Nim nodded. I'm sure. Cerise was lost in thought. She floated beside Nim, passing in and out of focus. Everything was getting fuzzy. I have to go, Nim said. Her voice was already dazed and far away. Cerise came back from whatever thought had been consuming her attention. She looked Nim in the eye with a look of renewed determination. Hold on for just a little longer, sister. I'll see you again soon. What are you planning? Nim asked her fading sibling. I'm going rogue, Cerise said with a grin. Everything went black again. Time passed. Nim couldn't tell how long. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the shared body with Rhea. Thea was gone, and the fire had died down. The room was dim, and Rhea slept peacefully beside her. Nim took a moment to sit in the quiet room and soak up the peaceful moment. So much had happened so quickly, and she hadn't really had time to think. The fire popped softly, and Nim took a deep, somewhat shaky breath. She didn't want to think too much now, but she had to make a plan. Cerise might have a plan, or that might have been a dream and nothing more. Nim couldn't rely on it. She needed her own plan. She needed to act. Thea watched with a smile as Nim struggled to control the sculpted body the two girls now shared. On another small screen, she could see the monster Kez lumbering shadow. He was always moving, never pausing for rest. He would never find peace. Nim was moving toward the door of their room, but Thea wasn't worried. The doors were locked and controlled by a series of buttons on the panels before Thea in the control room. Her fingers tingled. She needed action. The earlier battle with Moz and the Flybits had been far too quick for her liking. The energy she gained had been great, but Moz had not fought the way Thea had expected. She needed more. She tapped a few buttons and watched the screens. Nim was moving slowly. Thea rolled her eyes. Why Rhea, an enchantress who was second only to Thea in power, had allowed herself to be weighted down by her cousin, from an ancient and soon-to-be-extinct bloodline, Thea could not understand. Nim couldn't even pull her own weight, and she could barely handle this sculpted goddess body. Time to mess up their perfect youthful facade. Nim was almost to the door. She would find it open, unlatched even. All she had to do was pull. The monster Ke would also find his door open. A rare occurrence. He checked every time he passed, despite the many disappointments. One day it would open. He was certain of it. Today was that day. Thea settled back to enjoy the show. Time for some fun. She hoped Rhea would wake up and take over before Ke destroyed them completely. She was counting on the girls remaining alive. She could heal them again. Maybe connect with the river girl this time. She could use another hit of power, and it would help them trust her. If Ke did end up killing them, she could bottle their essence and save it for a low time. It was a win-win, really. Her opponents were falling one by one, and she was finding it kind of boring. She had hoped for some resistance. Nim had found the door, and the light from the hallway made a bright rectangle in the dark room. Ke's door was open as well. He waited in the shadows. He was a vain creature and avoided the light as much as possible. He was a lurker, not an attacker. Thea sighed with frustration and punched a few more buttons. It was time to spice things up a little and invite a few more to the party. Doors popped open throughout the mansion. The halls filled with the snuffles and growls as creatures of the night saw a glimmer of freedom. Thea smiled as Nim's body tensed. She paused in the hallway, listening. Another growl shook her, and she took a step back. She pressed herself against the wall and inched along. Thea punched another button. The door across from Nim opened with a drawn-out creak. Nim's terrified gaze met the glowing eyes that stared out at her from the darkness. Then she began to scream. And that's the end of Chapter 36, book lovers. I hope you're still enjoying Heart of the Storm. Come back next week, and I am going to have my top reads of 2021. We're wrapping up this year, and it's been a good one. Thank you all so much for listening, and until next time, keep reading.
Cats.